to lesson 14, assessing products. So the last lesson was about assessing projects, and now we're going to focus on how to assess that final product within a project. So you're going to think about how to determine specific products based on proficiency, so how to create them within a project, and then how to assess them. So we have to think about, before we think about even assessing it, we have to choose a product that is relevant to the students, is appropriate based on their proficiency level, has authenticity, and is an exemplar project within the principles of PBLL. So let's begin there, designing a final product. One of the main characteristics we've already discussed with PBLL is authenticity. So the first thing you may want to approach the creation of a product is to think about what real people do on the job and the products they create in the workplace. Consider the professionals that you may interact with on a daily basis. And then based on the role that they serve, what is something that they actually create that serves a real purpose in the real world? In addition to authenticity, you really need to consider the level of proficiency of your student. So many people get hung up with PBLL with novice learners and thinking they can't do PBLL with novice learner. You have to start by thinking about what they're able to do. So this is a tool that Liliana Lopez and I created, and we'll share this with you in the follow-up portion of this lesson. But thinking about, modifying from the ACTFL proficiency guidelines and the description of what that learner is able to do, thinking about what culminating products they would be able to create based on the performance that they're able to handle within their range. So for example, a novice mid learner, and that will most likely only apply to the first project. We know that students move very quickly from the novice low, novice mid to novice high once they acquire some language. So a novice mid can communicate minimally by using a number of isolated words and memorized phrases limited to a very particular context of the language that's being learned. They're not yet making that transfer. So they might make an infographic or an instructional video, write a letter, draw a map, create a schedule. And then as you move into a novice high, some of the same products may apply, but maybe they'll begin to create something like a timeline or a digital story, something more involved that has more language, like a recipe or a menu. And then intermediate low, we might even be moving on to something like a script. Cutting from this document and moving more towards the advanced section, you can see that an intermediate mid is able to express personal meaning by creating with the language. So they could serve as a tour guide potentially, or create a campaign for something, or a review. When you start to get into the advanced, remember you can still use any of these products that are already listed, but you can add more that require a more advanced proficiency. So a persuasive essay that sounds fairly traditional, but if you put it into a context like the panel presentation to local media, a persuasive essay becomes a compelling presentation for a local audience. So we want to think about, authentic products, but then we want to begin with identifying the significant content that your students need to learn. And so this comes from the World Readiness Standards for Learning Language. It comes from the ACTFL standards, your state standards, You want to align it with proficiency levels and think about what your curriculum is. Then you're going to identify the proficiency or performance levels, again, making sure our products are authentic. So looking at again, the BIE project design rubric that Stephen shared the link with you, one of the essential project design elements is that we have key knowledge, understanding, and success skills within a project. So an effective PBL project will focus on teaching students important knowledge, understanding, and skills, including, and that's what makes PBLL even more compelling for students, is that they're also thinking about key success skills, not just content and not just language, but the skills they need embedded with those. I included a snapshot of the 21st Century Skills Map from ACTFL, which is another great resource. It was created in partnership with P21 and ACTFL. Also think about using can-do statements when creating a product. So if we're looking at Novice High, I can communicate and exchange information about familiar topics using phrases and simple sentences. You're not going to have students do extremely advanced topics in an unusual setting. They're in Novice High, so you want to think about very familiar settings, and you want to think about what they are able to speak confidently about. And so it's usually about themselves, about school, about their home. So connect the proficiency level with the product. Remember, the product in PBLL should be a public product, so students should be sharing their work with other people, both from within the school and out of the school, and they should be able to present what they're creating and defend it. The idea of a public product also means that it has an authentic use for an authentic audience. So they don't necessarily need to defend what they're doing in detail, but that they can actually give it to somebody who would actually use it. And what's important to remember is that the audience, the idea that the product is public, it doesn't just come in at the end. You want to think how you can build in an authentic audience throughout the project process. So are there local businesses that you can interact with? Are there community members, nonprofit organizations? And so think about how you can bring them in from the very beginning, from an entry event, use the public audience to help the students actually acquire the language, and then include them in the final presentation. And remember that the final product should be led to with a driving question. And the idea that the driving question is there to increase proficiency and engage with the target culture. So you want it to be understandable and inspiring to students. You want it to directly lead them to gain the intended knowledge, skills, and understanding that the project is supposed to do. So when thinking about your first PBL project, you want to have an individual product and a team product. You're not just assessing your students on what they were able to create as a team, but you want to have evidence where you can assess them as individually as well. And think about if you can embed all of the modes of communication within the project. So here's an example that shows different voice and choice within the product. So it depends on your level of comfort as a PBLL teacher, what you want your students to do. So if this is your first project, you may want them in teams to all create the same product with the same focus. So the technology night that we discussed in the last webinar wouldn't exactly work for that. while they all are creating the same product, they're doing a presentation or a Q&A about a particular technology, their focus is different. So in that case, that project used the same product, but a different focus. Same thing for the website with the restaurant reviews. The product was the same. All the students and student teams created restaurant reviews, but they wrote about a different restaurant. The more adept you get in facilitating PBLL projects, you might want to provide the most voice and choice for students, which is different product and different focus. So now that you have some idea about how to identify possible products for projects and what characteristics they should have, let's talk about assessing a final product. It's different than assessment throughout the project process, but it is similar to the performance assessment benchmarks in that you want to use a rubric and you want to provide that rubric ahead of time. Now, you can't give a student a final product without first providing plenty of opportunities throughout the project process for them to self-evaluate, for them to revise, for them to get peer feedback and teacher feedback. This is a critical part of assessment of a final product. So they will receive by you a summative assessment or a final grade, if you will, but you can't do that without allowing them opportunities to self and peer critique and revise. Here's a rubric for Rubrics, which was developed by someone at, it was adapted by one of the professors at Monmouth University, and this is also on the BIE website. So when you're thinking about creating your rubric for the final product, remember that the criteria that you select, you want that to be derived from standards and appropriate for the product and task. You want there to be a distinction between the levels or the columns. I've often heard if you choose too many columns, the rubric can get a little complicated, and then you don't have each level being distinct from the other or a clear and logical order. So you might want to stay with 3 or 4 columns. This one has below, approaching, and meeting. You want to make sure, so this one has, you want to make sure that the writing is understandable to all users of the rubric. So in this case, the users of your rubric are students. So it has to be in student-friendly language. The can-do statements are a great place to pull exemplar language from, because those are the can-do statements are taking standards and putting it in language where students can self-assess and say what they can do with the language. And then there's thinking about the actual use of a rubric. And an advanced practice is students and teachers might together jointly construct a rubric. This is a more advanced task in PBLL, but some teachers, even without doing PBLL, are already doing that in their classroom. And once you model what a good rubric is with students and you sort of digest it and they understand what a rubric looks like each time they do a project, or even each time they do a performance task or or performance you conduct a performance assessment, they understand how rubrics are used most successfully and can be really great resources to help you develop a rubric. And then it really serves as of how you're providing feedback to your students. So all the feedback that you're providing is grounded in that rubric. And so students are working to increase their the proficiency level of their final product or the quality of their final product based on that rubric, that means you provide feedback grounded in the language of the rubric. There was a couple of documents that were a little large to put in the PowerPoint, so I'm going to exit the slideshow and just show you those in Google Chrome for a second. But there's excellent places to go online for exemplar sample rubrics. So the Foreign Language Educators of New Jersey, I'm on the board of that organization, and they launched a wonderful project where they, it's part of a grant that they got, and there's proficiency rubrics. So here's here's a presentational rubric at the novice level. So you can see how it's based on proficiency. It's not based on a checklist where you say, okay, the final product had at least, if we're doing the technology unit, students were able to, students talked about in 5 sentences how they would use their target technology. But this is really about, was the student understood? Do they have cultural understanding? Are they using the level of proficiency they should? So are they only using memorized words or sentences, or are they able to create with the language? So Foreign Language Educators of New Jersey has some great rubrics. On the ActFL website, there's loads of examples of how to create integrated performance assessment rubrics. So I would just encourage you to search that, and I'll share this particular one with you as well. But if we look again at a presentational rubric, this is interpersonal. See how it focuses on the language function, the text type, comprehensibility, language control. It's not about the requirements of the project. It's really about the proficiency level of the student. And that's what PBLL is about. It's about getting a student to acquire language and do something meaningful with the language and really perform with the language. Fairfax County Public Schools also has performance assessments for language students, and I'll share those with you as well. So once again, here's our information here's our information to continue to keep in touch with us. You can contact us on Twitter or via email.